Hello, I am Ed Fuquay, Young Adult Librarian Extraordinaire here at Woonsocket Harris Public Library.
Solitaire, Frisbee from the Children's Room.
And we're here to continue our discussion of Chinese mythology. We're talking about the Monkey King today.
All right.
Are you ready?
I am so ready.
Yes, it's very exciting. Before we discuss the Monkey King, though, I want to mention that he is the first of our great trickster gods that we're going to run into.
Okay.
We've mentioned trickster gods before. They've kind of hovered around the edge of some of the ancient religions. But I think Monkey King is like the earliest full flowering of that concept. Trickster gods are in a lot of different mythologies. They're extremely popular characters. They're always the underdog who wins through brains rather than brawn. They tend to outwit their opponents. They're very transgressive. They specialize in breaking the rules. And they usually mean well, but not always. There are some evil trickster gods.
But this is not our first encounter.
No. I've mentioned tricksters in the past. Somebody put Set in Egypt as a trickster god, trapping his brother in the coffin and drowning him and cutting him up and things like that. In a lot of ways, I don't think Set qualifies. He doesn't seem all that bright.
It's one heck of a trick.
Yeah, it's a good trick. You got to give him credit for that. But with Monkey King, we're finally reaching like the one of the truly great trickster gods. And he accomplishes great things, but not always the way anyone expects, or in a way that anyone likes. One thing about trickster gods is pantheons put up with them because they tend to get the job done. You never tell Raven not to open that box, so I've locked the sun away, or try to tell Loki that we'll never find a way to outwit that frost giant, because you know what's going to happen, and stuff is going to get broken along the way.
It's a personal challenge.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we all have that friend who comes over to help us move our stereo and breaks a window, Yeah, those are the trickster gods. Monkey King is one of the most popular characters in the world. Millions of people all over the world are familiar with him. Many people in America are familiar with him through the anime, comic books, manga. It's almost impossible to count the number of adaptations there have been of his story.
Did you say it was most recently Jet Li?
Yes, there's a Jet Li movie not that long ago. Stephen Chow, a comedian who never really made it in America, but he's very popular in Asia. Stephen Chow did a whole series of movies. The big story of Monkey King is called Journey to the West. They're telling new Monkey King stories all the time. Literally on Netflix, they debuted a new series called New Adventures of Monkey, because you just can't get enough of him. Even Big Bird met the Monkey King. Yes, it's true. There's a special called Big Bird in China, in which he wandered across China trying to to solve this riddle. And the Monkey King was there giving him help along the way. Yeah, he's a great character. He's seen in Chinese opera all the time. Very recognizable, the makeup and so forth. He's sometimes played for laughs. He's sometimes a vaguely sinister character. The Italian erotic artist Milo Manara did a series about him called The Ape, in which he definitely stressed the sexual elements of it.
Well, you said he's very recognizable.
Yeah.
What does he look like?
Oh, he's humanoid, but he always has something of the monkey about him. The Peking Opera, they have facial makeup on to suggest the cheekbones, and he often has a fringe of fur going around his chin.
Okay.
That's sort of like that chin strap beard kind of thing, to imply the kind of facial fur that an actual monkey would have. No one knows what kind of monkey he's supposed to be. There were probably a lot of monkey-like minor gods and demons whose stories all got sort of steamrolled together to make, Sun Wukong. The story Journey to the West was written in the 16th century.
Okay.
So while Europe was going through its, beginning of the Renaissance, China was doing this. It's roughly 2,000 pages long. It's huge. It's a gigantic book. I won't pretend that I've read it. Just reading short versions of it takes up an enormous amount of time. It's with the amount of time it takes to read it, you can actually go to China. So the story of the Monkey King.
Okay.
Like all great figures, he has a miraculous birth. He was born from a rock.
Okay.
Yep, there's a rock, and according to the full version, the rock splits open, and inside it is another rock shaped like an egg. And this splits open, and it becomes a monkey. A monkey is born from the rock. He calls himself Stone Monkey, which is pretty apt description. Anyone who watches Avatar: The Last Airbender will know that he too is born from a rock in the first episode. So it's a very powerful and significant thing that happens that way. In the beginning, he's a ordinary monkey. He's like really intelligent and so forth. He's hanging out with all the other monkeys, eating fruit in the jungle. But they want more from life. He wants more from life than this. He winds up discovering, he dives through a waterfall and discovers a cave that has this like huge mansion in the inside that's full of all kinds of expensive stuff and free food. So his entire monkey tribe move in there and they declare him their king. So he changes his name from Stone Monkey to the much more appropriate Handsome Monkey King. He is not shy.
Okay.
So now he's the Handsome Monkey King. He rules over a bunch of monkeys who love him very much. But he notices that somebody in his tribe gets old and dies, and he can't stop it. So just as we saw with Gilgamesh in a very different myth cycle, he becomes upset that people, get old and die. And certainly he doesn't want to get old and die. So he sails away from his homeland, sails across the face of the world, which is Asia. He meets with various people, trains with them, learns different superpowers and so forth. He eventually settles down with a Taoist master. He learns Kung Fu. He learns how to transform his body into all kinds of different things, which become very useful. And eventually, in Taoism, you can, in theory, reach that perfect state in which you become immortal. And he actually becomes a Taoist immortal. He also gains the power to walk on clouds, or fly on clouds, kind of like Superman, depending on how good the special effects department is. So he becomes immortal. In some versions of it, he also steals his master's immortality pills. It's not in every version of the story. So now he's immortal, and he wants to go back to his people and tell them everything that he's learned. But he figures, now that I'm a cool warrior monkey, I need a cool weapon. So he goes to the place where all the great warriors get their weapons from, which is the Dragon King of the Eastern Sea. He's one of the great dragon kings who rules the world, in this case, the Eastern Ocean. So he goes down there, and making weapons is what this dragon does. And so he asks for the best weapon that he's got. So the Dragon King brings out these magic swords. He's like, it's not good enough. And he brings out this halberd, this huge axe. He's like, I can do better than that. So no matter what the Dragon King brings out, the Monkey King doesn't like it. His name was changed to Sun Wukong by his master, because his Taoist master really thought he should have an actual name, so he called him Sun Wukong. Wukong apparently means awakening to emptiness. There's a lot of emptiness in Monkey King. So the Dragon of the Eastern Sea is showing off all these weapons, and he's not happy. So the Dragon King lives in this huge marble palace that's held up by a bunch of pillars. He looks at the pillars and says, "That's perfect, I'll take it." And the dragon says, "Well, that's holding up my palace, you can't have that." He says, "Oh, no problem." So he grabs it and rips it out. And so he has this ginormous pillar in his hand, which, using the magic powers that he's gained, he now shrinks down to a tiny, tiny size, as big as a toothpick. And he sticks it inside his ear so he can carry it around that way. So the Dragon King is rushing around trying to keep the ceiling from collapsing, and gives him a suit of magic armor to shut him up and shoves him out the door. He goes back to his people, and by this point his people have been enslaved by another race. So he comes along, he saves them from slavery, so they're all, "Yay, handsome Monkey King." So he's happy again. But he realizes, although he's immortal, his people aren't. His people will still age and die, and that's just intolerable. So meanwhile, the way in which he became a Taoist immortal was kind of fudging on the rules a little bit. His master was very lenient with him. So the gods in heaven thought that this really isn't, the best way to become immortal. So to teach him a lesson, they go to Yama, the king of the dead. And so one day Yama sends 2 demons to grab him and drag him down to hell. So there he is, Sun Wukong in hell. He tells him, obviously it's a mistake because he's immortal. And Yama says, no mistake. And so he sticks his finger into his ear, pulls out his ginormous staff, and starts wailing on people. You ever see a monkey carrying a big stick? That's always the Monkey King's son, Wukong. So he's fighting off demons with his staff, and in the course of the fight, he sees that this really large magic book next to Yama's throne, and in it is the name of every person and when they will die. Thinks he, I can use that. So during a brief respite from the hordes of demons attacking him, he rushes over, and he finds his name in the book, and he crosses it out. And he flips through really quickly and finds the names of all of his monkey friends back in his tribe and crosses their name out of the book too. So when Yama comes back with another retinue of demons to attack him, he says, "You can't keep me here. I can't possibly be in the land of the dead. Just check your book." And Yama's like, okay, pulls up the book, opens the page, and his name's not there. What do you know? Yama has no power over him. The Lord of Death literally cannot hold him. So he's found a third way of becoming immortal.
Okay.
He was getting pretty good at this point. There's a lengthy sequence in which the Jade Emperor of Heaven tries to find some way to get rid of him. At one point, they bring him up to heaven and they make him the cleaner of the royal stables. But Monkey King and Horse Poo do not get along, so that didn't last very long. He nevertheless started calling himself the Great Sage Equal to Heaven, which annoyed the Jade Emperor even more. He wanted to send an army down. Yes?
What provoked him in the first place?
Well, he had been to heaven and decided to leave and go back to the earth. So he figures that makes him a sage who's so cool he doesn't have to stay in heaven. So therefore, he became the great sage who was equal to heaven. It made sense in his mind. So he's back with his people now, grooving in his monkey lifestyle. And so the Jade Emperor wants to send out an army to attack him. But his generals point out, well, first of all, he's immortal in 3 different ways. So we can't actually kill him. And second of all, he's also never lost a fight. So he can call himself Great Sage Equal to Heaven, but if we attack him and he wins, he can call himself whatever he wants. So the Jade Emperor, drums his fingers on his throne for a while, and he finally says, okay, so I'll bring him up to heaven, but I'll give him a better job, one that he can't possibly be upset with. Right. Now, the immortality of all the gods in heaven is, of course, kept by these magic peaches that they grow. It's not unlike the magic apples of Idun we'll meet in Norse mythology many years later. So they have these magic peaches that make them immortal. It takes 1,000 years for the peach to ripen. And so he makes son Wukong the guardian of the sacred peach grove. So he's very happy with this. It's an extremely important, prestigious position. So he's strutting around heaven with his big stick, calling himself the great sage, equal of heaven, and overhears the gods laughing at him because he's so full of himself. And he realizes they still don't take me seriously. So in a huff, he goes back to his garden and starts eating peaches. A lot of peaches. All the peaches in the garden. Which is a lot of immortality. Each peach makes him immortal, and there were thousands of peaches. So now he's immortal so many times over. So the gods discovered this when the fairies went to harvest, this year's crop of peaches for the big peach festival. Yeah, they're gone. Son Wukong had staggered away and got into the festival and was like guzzling down wine when they came for him. So they thought, what are they going to do with this guy? So fortunately, Lao Tzu was there. And we saw Lao Tzu last week. He was inventing Taoism. He's now living in heaven with the other gods. So Lao Tzu says, I know what to do. He has a magic 8-sided cauldron. And you can stick him inside the cauldron and heat it up super, super hot. And this will dissolve his body back down into its base elements and reduce him back to a liquid form. And then they'll get the immortality formula back from him. So they can make their magic elixir again to become immortal.
Gosh.
It is a sad end to the Monkey King. But Lao Tzu has once again underestimated him. He was inside the cauldron for 49 days in its incredible heat and pressure and temperature. And eventually he gets bored with this and bursts free, and he is completely unharmed because becoming immune to fire was one of the tricks he picked up when he was wandering the earth learning things from various sages. So he bursts out, And it has no negative effects at all, although he was in the flames for so long that his eyes take on like a flaming hue sometimes. So he has glowing red eyes occasionally. It's sometimes kind of used like the Hulk sort of thing. In some of the stories when he's about to like really, get down to someone, his eyes start blazing red. Then stuff's going to hit the fan when that happens. So he bursts out, he smashes Lao Tzu's sacred cauldron, and is running around heaven again, smashing things with his stick. And so no one knows what to do. So all the gods get together and they call in Buddha. Now, when you last met Buddha, he was founding Buddhism. So he's up in heaven too, naturally. And they go to Buddha, and you may guess that the person who wrote the book is actually a Buddhist rather than a Confucianism or Taoist. Goes to Buddha to ask for help. So Buddha says, all right. So he challenges Sun Wukong to a test. And he says, jump into my hand and I will catch you. Now, if you can leap out of my hand, then you'll have free reign of heaven and no one will try and stop you. But if you can't do that, then you have to submit to the punishments that we give you. And so Sun Wukong naturally does not suspect the trap because he's the Monkey King. So he jumps up into Buddha's palm and he shoots up into the air. Did I mention he can fly too?
Had not.
Yeah, he flies. So yeah, he shoots up into the air as high as he can possibly go. He goes all the way until he reaches like the top of the universe, and he sees the actual pillars that are holding up heaven.
So we've encountered Batman, the Hulk, now Superman.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's good. All right, so he gets up there and he sees the big like pillars, the 5 pillars that hold up all the heavens. So naturally, he like grabs his stick and he scratches his name on one of the pillars. And then he pees on it. Because, Monkey King.
Yeah.
So he shoots back down to the earth and lands back in Buddha's hand. It says, so there, you like overweight bald guy. And Buddha says, bah, but what have you really accomplished? And he opens his hand more, and Sun Wukong looks down and sees a tiny, tiny version of his name written on one of the Buddha's fingers, and a little pea stain just below it. And Buddha says, I am everywhere, I am all things, so you could never leave the palm of my hand. And so for the first time in his life, Sun Wukong realizes he's been snookered, and so he has no choice but to accept their punishment. So Buddha creates a mountain out of the 5 elements. In Chinese mythology, there are 5 elements rather than the 4 that is in European mythology. It's earth, fire, water, wood, and metal. Okay. So if you're fighting a Kung Fu master who's an elemental master, be very careful to know which element he's master of before you fight. Very important. All right, so he creates a mountain out of these all 5 elements, and he crushes Sun Wukong beneath it, and he's trapped forever. I'm sure we'll never hear from him again. I'm
skeptical.
Yeah, 500 years pass. And while this has been happening, demons have been running over the world. There's a bull-headed demon god who's like unleashing monsters on the world. People are crying out. And the gods are up in heaven. They realize, well, the sutras of the Buddha could put an end to this. That could bring enlightenment to the people to save them from these demons. But the problem is they have to distribute all of the Buddha's like prayers and writings to the people. And how could they do that? Because there's an army of demons, and you technically have to cross the Himalayan mountains to reach China from there. And so the gods said to themselves, who could possibly be strong enough and clever enough and handsome enough to bring the sutras to the world and bring Buddhism forth? Can you see what's coming?
I do.
Yes, only one person can bring the Buddhist sutras out into the world. And that's what's going to happen next week. This is the prelude.
Okay.
This is just the prologue chapter of the story. The actual story hasn't started yet. He has already been thrown out of heaven twice. It ticked off the leaders of the 3 major religions in the world. And now his story begins.
Now, about the peaches.
Yes.
Okay. The peaches make one immortal.
Yes.
But to be immortal is supposed to be forever.
Yeah.
However, there seems to be a recurring need to consume more peaches.
I think it's because they just like them. They're really delicious.
Okay.
Which once he started, he couldn't stop. I've never read a version of the myth in which they actually start aging without the peaches. I think it's just something that they do as gods, but they do keep them out of the hands of mortals.
I mean, I am planning to go apple picking, so
Yeah.
I guess I get it.
Well, in Norse mythology, when Idun's apples are stolen, there's actually a chance the Norse gods could wither away and die.
Oh.
But the Norse gods are a whole different like kettle of fish.
Mm-hmm.
They're all going to die anyway. We'll discuss them at length at some point.
I've literally never heard the phrase kettle of fish.
Sorry. It is. It's a
It's
totally
interesting.
different kettle of fish. We had
Sorry.
one kettle of fish, and now we have another kettle of fish. They're different, completely different.
I want cod. That's
Sorry.
Some ribs and lemon.
All right, so next week we'll get into Journey to the West, the epic story.
Part 2.
Yes, the Monkey King Part 2 next week.
All right.
So until then, I have been Ed.
Solitaire.
We'll see you next time. Until then, be safe.